Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Inter, and welcome back to the channel for another update to the Top Gods for Every Role series. As I sometimes do when the meta favours it, this edition will be a top 5 gods for every role instead of 3 due to the meta not being fully worked out yet after the 9.5 river and just so many gods being really good right now. I just couldn't cut down most of the roles to a clear top 3. This one will also be a little more on my personal opinions than normal since it's very early after such a major patch. Quick shout out to my Nexus store where you can get gems for up to 33% off right now. Smite is back, and if you're jumping in and looking to pick up some new skins, buying your gems from here helps support the work I do at no extra cost to you. Thanks. But with that said, let's jump in with our first role being the junglers. First up for jungle, we have Thor, who's been on top of the meta for a long time, but only got better with the 9.5 river. His stun double tap combo does minimum half health throughout the entire game, and if you don't have beads, he can literally just 100 to 0 you with his all-in ult combo. Thor was already good and only saw improvements from patch 11.6. Next up is another familiar face in Thanatos, who I think has fallen off quite a bit since his peak earlier this year, but did get a nice bump up for similar reasons to Thor after the 9.5 river. Snowball is more important than ever, and Thanatos can run away with games from an early lead better than he could before. I do think he's a tad overrated at the moment, but would still consider him a top 5 jungler for patch 11.6. Next up is Lance, who's been quite a force in the meta for a few patches now. Despite taking some nerfs, Lance still gets away with so much due to his mount and ult allowing him to die for free and either chase down backliners after they use their movement or disengage with a massive health shield if need be. He does absurd damage while also being very safe and quite versatile. Definitely a top jungler at the moment. Next up is Susano, who's another returning face that just won't leave the meta. He does have a bit of a slower early game, which you have to play a bit more carefully than some of these other junglers so you don't get snowballed on, but once you do get some ranks in your abilities and 3 or 4 items online, Susano could 100 to 0 people ridiculously easy after the 11.6 changes, and is still super strong in the jungle right now. And our final jungler for the list is Camazotz, who've been sort of creeping into the meta even before the 9.5 river, but those changes definitely buff him a lot. He's got plenty of sustain to heal off stray abilities that do 30 to 40% of your HP now, where other junglers might struggle with getting poked out before a fight. His ult easily does half of a backliner's health and is completely safe and uninteractable, so if you or your team can poke someone down to half, which is very easy after the patch, it's pretty much a free kill. Kama is super strong right now and even quite good in solo lane for what it's worth, though he won't actually make the list there. Speaking of solo lane, let's cover that role next, and my first solo laner is probably no surprise to anyone who's played on 11.6 so far, that being Mulan. She was already pretty damn good before the changes, and the 9.5 river, making early game on Snowball far more important, just catapulted her into being the uncontested best solo laner right now, in my opinion. She does so much damage once you get level 2 on your 1 and 2, her 3 is super easy to hit and very disruptive, she's super easy to get a lead on in the laning phase and translate that lead onto your team with mid-game rotations. The only thing to note with Mulan is that she still has a pretty weak late game unless you're fed, but with how easy it is to snowball right now, that's generally not an issue most of the time, and you can close the game out before Mulan's late game issues become a major deal. Mulan is just super broken right now. Next up is Bellona, who, similar to Thanatos from jungle actually, has fallen off a little but remains strong in 11.6. The snowballing changes definitely help her out, as her strong lane clear and boxing can easily translate into a big lead out of the laning phase that you can snowball pretty easily in the post 9.5 river environment. Bellona's still really strong, but others have risen into the meta to rival her now. One of those rising stars is Kukulkan, who got some specific buffs fairly recently, and even towards the end of year 10 he got some buffs to compete with the auto attack solo laner meta. These buffs, combined with great usage of mystical mail and of course his berserk mode, give him a strong super early laning phase, which as we all know is critical for the current meta. He can still struggle late game, but with the buff to make his ult scale down to 80 seconds, that was massive for him in regard to that being a very low cooldown massive AoE knockup that's great for engaging late game team fights. Kuchu is definitely back, boys. Next up is Wukong, who remains a top solo laner in my eyes. His early laning phase might not quite match the likes of Bellona, Mulan, or Kukulkan, but he's very well rounded, extremely safe, and absolutely chunks after the 9.5 river with a little bit of damage in his build, such as Jotuns or Soul Eater. You can even go full damage from solo lane with Wukong, and it works surprisingly well. You will be playing a bit more of an assassin style than a frontliner in that case, which is worth considering for your team comp, but Wukong is still insane for solo right now. And finally, if you're looking for a magical solo laner to play at the moment, moment, Cthulhu is your man and my last pick for solo on this list. He's been sort of creeping on the edge of the meta ever since his buff a while back that freed up the cast on his 2. His laning phase is good enough to compete with a lot of the top meta picks due to strong clear, and his teamfight is probably the best of any solo laner on the list, perhaps in the entire game. That ult just lasts so long and is so impactful. And while the meta is far from late game focused after 11.6, Cthulhu has a strong enough laning phase to not worry too much about getting snowballed on, and can easily make it to that late game where he has some of the highest impact of any solo laner right now in teamfights. Definitely worth a try if you're looking for a magical solo at the moment. Speaking of magical though, let's leave duo lane for last and talk about some mid laners for patch 11.6. First up, we'll get Thoth out of the way as I think he's still super strong after the changes. He does have a weak super early game, but once you get your 1 max and a couple of items online, he starts absolutely chunking. Plus, his ult went from doing 80% of your health with Staff of Murden to pretty much one-shotting on the new patch, which definitely helps him. This is honestly a similar case to Thana and Bologna in that I think Thoth has fallen off a bit, but not enough for me to not still consider him top 5 for mid. Agni is much of the same and my next pick for mid. He has super strong clear for both the first round of buffs and the early mid waves, allowing him to get off to a good start and maybe even land early kills if people don't expect your dash damage after 9.5 revert. Late game he can suffer as he'll die extremely quickly when dived and has no CC immunity on his ult, much like Thoth, but he can equally deal insane damage back with a triple bomb basically 100 to 0ing people from far ranges and over walls. Agni's still absolutely solid in 11.6. Next up is a new face though off the back of many buffs and meta shifts, that being Ishel. She got some solid buffs towards the end of last season, and just last patch they made her ult heal herself when using it on enemies, not just on allies, making it basically an Anubis ult, including the lifesteal. But she also gets damage mitigation and omni movement during it as well. This buff can't be overstated as you can now just play her as a standard burst mage without worrying about hitting a teammate with the ult, and she does absolutely incredible damage while being safer than you'd think due to her massive self peel and healing. My next pick for mid is Chang'e, who's rocketed into the meta after the 9.5 revert. She's a bit more unconventional than some of these other picks, but boy does she absolutely delete people with the health and protection changes. An ult plus 1 is pretty much enough to 100 to 0 a squishy after the patch with Staff of Murden, and she has a built-in answer to getting one shot herself, which is always handy in her 2. Plus being able to sustain off stray ability hits with her 3 is always nice. You might have to play a little more careful in the early game, especially in terms of wave clear, but once you get a few items and blink online, Chang'e becomes an absolute killing machine in 11.6. And my final mid laner is Janus, and you might start to see a theme here. Yeah, Janus is another one of those mid laners that has a one-shot combo that just became a lot more consistent with the 9.5 revert. He also power farms the best of any mid, and with the changes to lower the health and protections of almost everything PvE related, he can just zoom around the map, not even interacting with the enemy, and still get a massive lead, as his 2 one-shots the wave and most jungle camps. He's also a great Doom Orb user, which helps out with that as well, and as mentioned, his ult plus 2 combo with Staff of Murden was already close to one-shotting pre-patch, sometimes it did, and it is definitely one-shotting now. He can be harder to play than a lot of other mids, but if you have a good Janus, now's the time to break him out. Moving on to duo lane though, first up we have ADCs, and my first one is a new face you've probably all seen terrorizing your games in 11.6, that being Medusa. Her damage is simply off the charts after the 9.5 revert, with her 1 alone easily doing 50 to 60% HP if she hits all the autos at most stages of the game, probably more than that later on. She also is a great duality user which got giga buffed and is actually an insane item now for the gods that do use it. I'll of course mention that Medusa is an insane mid laner this patch as well, seeing just as much if not even a little more play in mid than in ADC. But I already had so many mid laners to include that I thought I'd throw her in the ADC section. But yeah, she's also insane in mid and has a lot of early pressure there too. Next up is a returning face in Anhur, who remains strong after the update. His passive and early game burst damage became even more valuable with the 9.5 revert, and he can absolutely surprise you with how much damage he does in the early levels and snowballs super quick. You all know Anhur, he's been meta for months in the ADC role, and if anything he got a little better after the 9.5 revert. Next up is another new face though, and that's Charybdis. This is almost solely off of the back of some insane buffs over the last few months, like reducing the penalty for item procs on her basic attacks, general buffs to her passive and 2, fixing her ultimate to make it much easier to land, and of course getting CC immunity during the startup of her 3, making an already extremely safe character even safer. She didn't particularly benefit from the 9.5 revert, if anything it hurt her a little bit as a more late game ADC, but the amount of buffs and quality of life fixes she's received recently have turned her into an absolute monster, pun intended. Next up is Ula, who absolutely did benefit from 9.5 a ton. Similar Similar to some of the mages on the list, the lowering of base health and protection sort of pushed him over a tipping point where his full combo from Axe can pretty much 100 to 0 you now. Ability-based hunters in general got a lot stronger from the changes, as bursting people down quickly became a lot easier and more important after the update, and Ulla is one of the biggest beneficiaries of that. He's also received numerous buffs over the course of the last half of year 10 and first half of year 11, but it really was the 9.5 revert that showed how strong he truly is, and he's definitely doing work in patch 11.6. And my final ADC for the list is another ability hunter, that being Matikaras. Again, like Medusa, this guy is insane in mid as well and probably sees more play there if anything, so don't be afraid to whap him out as a mid laner, but Marty pretty much benefits in similar ways to Medusa and Ulla in that ability burst damage has become much more valuable, as has early pressure, which these ability hunters excel at, and he's of course an insane duality abuser. Marty is back, boys. And now for our final role for the video, the supports. First up is Ares, who's been meta for a long time now and only got better with the 9.5 changes, amping up his early pressure and kill potential with chains. There's also a surprising amount of gods in the meta with no CC immunity on their ults, such as Ulla, Thoth, Agni, or Susano, the latter of which gets shut down super hard by chains as well. Early game dominance and snowballing got better, which means Ares got better as well, and he remains a force in the meta. Switching gears for a minute though, I think Geb has risen into the top spots for support as a way to counter the burst meta. To be fair, he can also compete in it with blink ults into 2, but his shield has been having an even larger impact than before, in either keeping his more late game focused allies alive throughout the early game, or just keeping his team from being completely blown up by stuff that would normally 100 to 0 you after the 9.5 revert. He's not talked about too much, but Geb is performing extremely well right now, and I highly recommend you give him a try. Next up is Terra, who's been performing exceptionally lately, and I think the major buffs she got a while back are finally being recognized and showcased, as well as her buffs in 11.5 making her ult, which is one of the best and most impactful in the game, now go down to 70 seconds at max rank, along with a big increase to her healing from Monolith, which is extra valuable now to heal off stray abilities that completely chunk you in a post 9.5 revert environment. Terra is super strong right now, definitely give her a try. Next up is Fafnir, who's one of those supports that's sort of been hovering on the edge of the meta for a while after his buffs to make his ult last a full minute late game, but he also got some nice stuff in 11.5 with free gold generation, a faster D-transform, and ability to proc basic attack item effects on his Dragon Breath. The guy has just been riding the buff train non-stop for the last year and a half or so, and it seems he's finally being recognized for how strong he truly is. The one drawback is that he has an exceptionally weak early game in a meta where the early game can decide the whole match, but if you can get past about 10 minutes in with this guy, he does absolutely insane work. And my final support for the video is Bacchus, who's risen into the meta like a juggernaut after the 9.5 revert. This is mainly due to his damage output being way more relevant now than it was before. You're genuinely scared of Bacchus deleting half your health from a belly flop and ult even with a full support build now, which makes him super strong early to mid game. It happened ages ago, but the change to make his ult soft CC and non-DRable was also huge for him, just felt like I should mention that. Bacchus is super good right now as an aggressive carry support if you don't trust your teammates. But that's all I've got for the top 5 gods for every role in patch 11.6. This is all subject to change as the meta still isn't fully figured out yet from such an earth-shattering and sudden change to the core of how Smite plays, but I will update this video if anything major changes in the meta, so be sure to subscribe for that if you haven't already. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.